members and community members, we're glad that you are here this evening. The purpose of our study sessions is to provide an opportunity to share information between board members and administration around happenings and have discussions about that as we make decisions at regular board meetings for moving forward. So tonight you see that there is one agenda topic, and this study session is an additional study session that was added to ensure that there was plenty of time and opportunity for talking about the elementary boundary, attendance boundaries. So with that, I think I'll go ahead and get started, if that's all right. Very good. There are just a couple things, is that all right? Maybe if I let folks know about the configuration for tonight? Oh, got that? Okay, I'm sorry. Sorry, I guess I was thinking about what I was gonna say, so I wasn't paying as much attention as I should have. Thank you. We, as you all know, we have been working on looking at elementary attendance boundaries. We knew, even though you don't always connect all those dots, we knew that when we went out for a referendum and a referendum passed to build a new elementary school, we knew that we would be in the position that we would need to change elementary attendance boundaries. And again, I understand for all of us that seems, you know, sometimes until it happens, until we know exactly who's impacted, we don't pay as much attention. But we did know that that would be one of the outcomes of that successful referendum. Also want to remind board members in the community that we had a design team and input team of about 50 community members who have been on this journey, helping us, assisting us since January. We ensured that there were staff and parents from every one of our elementary schools, as well as administrators and other community members on the input team, in order for us to have multiple perspectives, because we know when we have multiple perspectives, we're able to make better decisions. Actually, one of the things that I have been drawing on as I've been thinking about this process is our theme this year that we kicked off the year with is We Are PLSAS, Ideas Matter. And certainly through the course of this process, your ideas, board member, your ideas and questions have certainly mattered. As you know, the input team brought 2 recommendations to you on April 22nd. And since that time, we've continued to hear questions and concerns from school board members and from community that we want to be sure that we had a chance to address. So that's why you'll be seeing a 3rd recommendation adding to the work tonight. Also wanted to make sure that we kept track of throughout the whole process. And a lot of this you've seen before, so I'm going to flip through some of this fairly quickly and get to the guiding change document. So all of the recommendations that are coming before you, board members have been vetted and do fill the guiding change document. The scope of the project that we have in front of us right now is really on the elementary attendance boundaries. The goal all along, not just to fulfill the guiding change principles, but really to ensure stability for our school district for the next 5 to 6 years. I do want to remind board members and the community members that there is a lot of additional work that will happen that's outside the scope of this project, but I just want to be sure that everybody's aware. You may have questions about some of these things right now, and while tonight we won't be discussing these, we certainly are paying attention to them. We'll be taking a look at elementary start times, so that'll be one of the other things that happens to determine who are those earlier or later starts. We'll work on transition plans to ensure a smooth transition to students and to families and to staff. It's important to remind the board and the community that last year, in anticipation of needing to move boundaries and because Red Tail Ridge was so over capacity, we did have about 70 students from Red Tail Ridge and about 30 students from Westwood that transitioned to Glendale. So that was a transition that's already happened in this process. Once attendance boundaries are set, we will examine our usage in our buildings and establish processes for in-district transfer requests, as well as, excuse me, open enrollment requests. And then another a question that we've gotten that I want to just assure families, parents, especially you, I know there have been some questions about students that maybe be supported through IEPs, and we have worked and will continue to work with families through that process as well. So as I said, 2 recommendations came to the board on April 22nd. We asked, because of some of the questions that individual board members raised as well as the community members, we did ask the input team to come back together to look at one of the original options. We did that for a couple of reasons. First of all, one of the decisions that the input team made was before the April 22nd recommendations were brought forward, was at that point to only bring 2 recommendations to the board. They didn't want to bring more than 2 recommendations. So we wanted to ask them, as they looked at some of the data, if they would consider bringing 3 recommendations forward. And then we just wanted to be sure that they had a chance to look at things. As we were leaving our last input meeting before this past week, there was one of the other options that several of the group members were talking about, and at that point we had made the decisions on the 2 recommendations and decided to move forward with that. But in light of some of the comments that we've received, the perspectives that we've received from community members and from school board members, we wanted an opportunity to bring the input team back together to take a look at that. So this evening we'll be looking at, and I'll quickly review, I know board members, you've reviewed this material, but one chance just to review all 3 of the options and then certainly take your questions. A couple of the things that I just want to note tonight that might look a little bit different. One of the things is, as we were looking at, we've always accounted for students in SAGE, and we didn't account for them within the Westwood, some of the Westwood numbers. So as we had with our pre-K programming, we put pre-K programs, we have 2 classrooms currently for nature-based preschool at Glendale and 2 at Jeffers Pond. We didn't do that originally with our SAGE numbers, so if you're looking at some of the packets from previous meetings, you'll see that some of the SAGE numbers are different. This now is inclusive of the SAGE classrooms. Part of that guiding change document was that SAGE would stay at Westwood as a district-wide program. All of our models then have the SAGE in the capacities for Westwood, and then in addition, all of the models right now have 2 sections of nature-based preschool at Glendale. Yes, at Glendale, and 2 sections at Jeffers Pond. And again, board members and community members, I want you to know that we annually take a look at our capacity of our buildings. And if any of those programs, especially those preschool programs, if we need to change sites because of enrollment numbers or because of capacity, we do that on an annual basis. Also want to just share that our goal in our district and our past practice in our district is to have neighborhood schools. As we were doing this, we also wanted to review the socioeconomic different variables to make sure that we knew and never were working for complete balance, but we wanted to ensure, as the guiding change document calls out, that we weren't creating unreasonable inequities within our buildings. So the neighborhood schools was definitely, the forefront of our goal, but we wanted to be sure that we were looking at that socioeconomic data as well. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share the 3 options again, and then really open it up for board discussion and conversation and questions that you might have. So again, here are current attendance boundaries. We do have some maps of the options up on the board as well, so hopefully those of you in the audience are able to see those. Post-construction, these are the numbers of rooms that will be available for programming, and you can also see where we have opportunities for special education programming as well as preschool programming. This is B1. Again, this hasn't changed at all. Capacities on this will look a little different because of the SAGE being included with Westwood at this point. And then again, the board members and community members, you've seen the numbers that go behind B1 and some of the socioeconomic breakdown of B1. And then again, looking at the current development, those are those blue and green circles, and then those larger circles are just those areas of interest. We know that there's land available there. We don't know what's gonna happen with that land, but we wanted to ensure that we were paying attention to that as we were looking at some long-term planning. Option C1. Here you can see the capacity. Socioeconomic breakdown there. And then the third recommendation that the input team would like you to consider this evening, sorry, C1 with the developments, is C4. So you can see some changes, and again, I know board members, you've had a chance to study this. Again, you can take a look at our capacity utilization. And then all three, you know, as I said, we're really in a great place because all three of the recommendations do fit the guiding change document and provide us the stability for the next 5 to 6 years as far as we can see in projections right now. And again, those active developments and then those areas of interest. So I know you've seen the rest of this multiple times. One of the other charts that we did want to add is just those side-by-side capacities for the projected capacities for the usage of each of the buildings. But from our perspective, all meet the guiding change document. And with that, I really don't want to waste any more time reviewing the information with you that I know you've had a chance to see, but we want to open it up to make sure that you have a chance to discuss and ask any questions that you might have.
Does anyone, Jonathan?
My first question, I think, is C4 is coming to us as another option now. I'm wondering if anybody can tell us from the input team's perspective, initially why that had been eliminated from consideration when they were bringing us to.
Yeah, you know what, I think with all of them, again, I don't want to speak for 50 members of an input team, but I think with all of them, you know, I think as we've gone through this process, there's a number of options that can work. And just in the multiple ways that the input team and the design team looked at all the options, you know, some of them just seem to make more sense than others. You know, and again, that's about perspective, right? Some of you would argue that, I'm sure, in the audience. But really taking a look to make sure that we were able to create neighborhood schools to the extent possible, and that really we had that stability of the 5 to 6 years. So I don't recall, Jeff, Jim, was there, or anybody else, was there anything else that?
2, I think, right? We wanted to bring 2 to the board, not 3. We could have probably brought 10 to the board, but 2 is what we decided.
I don't know if you folks heard that, but Jim just said that he reiterated what I had said about initially. The input team had said, you know, let's bring 2 recommendations forward, and we had done those 2. And then decided to bring another one forward.
And just to confirm, if I can throw one more in, you, I think, already addressed this, but at the back end, at the end of the 5 years, where all of those numbers are, we are retaining the ability to make changes with pre-K locations if we need. To me, the biggest concern with C4 is you get up over 90% at Jeffers.
Yeah.
So that creates a little flexibility.
Yep, there absolutely is. And again, you know, that's something that on an annual basis we take a look at. And if we need to move preschool program, you know, we try to do that in the spring so that parents and staff are well aware of it. But yeah, the numbers hold at the end of that 4th, 5th year, that might be higher than we want, and then we can move. There's plenty of sites in our elementary schools that are going to be great sites for nature-based preschool.
And I recognize it's a great program and parents love it and it's a great location for it. So if we want to move it, it's going to be an option.
And one of the things that we had talked about, you know, you'll see the Red Tail Ridge capacity is a little bit lower right now. We've never had the opportunity to have nature-based preschool at Red Tail Ridge because Red Tail Ridge has had, you know, have been over capacity for a while. That might be a really nice home and again, a chance to balance out those numbers.
comments? Melissa?
Yes, thank you. Piggybacking on Jonathan's comment about the plans that were passed, that now that are being brought forward, I guess I consider them original options, if you will. There was another original option that more closely mirrored what we have as our original boundaries. And it was not brought forward to the board, but now this one is being brought forward to the board, so I have questions about that. Because it seemed that, and I think it was referred to as C2, and I think the priority matrix of the neighborhood schools and the minimal amount of displaced students, I think those were some of our priorities and our goals here, and I know that it achieved better consistency with capacity than C4 or B1. I'm curious as to why that was not brought forward. It displaces less students. So that was my first question. The second question is, I'd like to see a matrix that shows each of the plans, how many students are being displaced from each plan, because that's a priority.
So I'll speak, I'm gonna take your second comment first, and then I'll go back to the first. While I hear what you're saying about students who would have to move, that actually wasn't on the guiding change document, so it certainly was part of the conversations that we had in terms of how many students moved. We know 100% of Greenwood students are moving, and so we know that families are certainly impacted on this. And yep, there are some options that have more families that need to move now. Again, what we were looking at is based on what we can tell, what are those 5 to 6 year stability rankings that we have. The first question, really, Melissa, the reason C4, and again, I'm grateful to the input team for coming back together around this. I think as we kept hearing perspective from community members and from individual school board members, there were a couple of concerns that were repeated with B1 and C1. And I kept coming back to the conversation at our last input meeting, where really there were a couple tables that were talking a lot about C4, and even one of the final conversations in the meeting that night was about C4. So as we continue to look at it and look at that to remedy some of the other concerns, that seemed to have a lot of support in the input team, even though it wasn't one that was originally brought to the board. So I'd say that's how I would answer that.
And a question that I would have for that is, again, ultimately, we have an input team, and that's valued, but ultimately the decision is before the board, and to be able to see an option which was considered viable at one point, being C2, that we could take a look at that.
Yeah, there's 3 options before the board this evening, and those were the 3 that the input team brought forward. But yeah, there've been multiple other models that the input team and the design team have looked at throughout the process.
So I guess I'm requesting, could we see C2 as a board? The board hasn't had the opportunity to see that.
Well, we have seen C2, we have the information for C2. But the committee, and if we want to honor the design and input teams, those are the 3 that they brought forward, and C2 is not one of them. We have information on C2. I think we have it on a couple of other ones, actually, so.
But I guess I don't understand why that's not being considered when the capacity does fit.
I guess I'm trusting the committee, the design input teams that did all the work and put on all the hours, and I want to respect their time. They have more expertise on this than any of us do, because they put in the time, and for whatever reason, they chose, first of all, to only bring 2 options forward. We listened to community input. I had my own questions, can we leave the community on the western side of the lake with the schools on the western side of the lake? That was my question. I know other board members had similar questions, and other questions. Those were all brought forward to Dr. Stallo, and the discussion was decided that the input and design team would come back together and look at that based on community input that we did have and board questions. I believe they've done their due diligence. I thank him 100% for the time they put in, for going back and looking at it again, and then coming forward with the 3 options. So in order to honor that, I think we need to go forward with the 3 options that they presented.
I respect their time and their work. When I take a look and a deep dive into some of the neighborhoods, and I'm seeing drive distances between 0.6 miles and 4.4 miles. That is a tremendous difference for an area that is not getting a neighborhood school. And if that was our priority, I'm just saying, maybe we need to revisit it, maybe we need to take a look at it. C2 offers that, and also for another neighborhood, they go from 2 miles to 5 Hawks versus 4+ miles to Jeffers Pond. Again, so multiple neighborhoods could be satisfied with the C2 program. And I think sometimes it's loudest voices carry the, the squeaky wheel metaphor, but, I mean, that's valid, and maybe the input team just missed it. I mean, I'd like to see more of a look at C2. We never got to look at it as a board. We're always looking at B1 and so on. It's worth taking a look at. Those are
Feelings from the
significant
rest of the board
differences.
about C2? Or going back to the other option?
One question that I had about the options is, obviously with the new one that was brought forth, it was pretty clear that the percentages stayed exactly the same for everything but Westwood and Jeffers. They kind of swapped a little bit back and forth. C2 seemed to leave less movement overall, other than obviously the Greenwood Westwood, but the 97% at 5 Hawks concerned me. And what was confusing to me is because some of the detail that was brought to the board is where those percentages were such a difference between the other options. As I was trying to compare how the boundaries were made, because not knowing the individual population percentages at the various areas, just kind of had to do it by process of elimination type of thing. And so that 97% in 5 Hawks, obviously we want a healthy standard deviation for potential growth and to make the various populations of the schools equal. That would have helped me a little bit, and I thought it was fairly obvious when we went into it the last time with some of the information that was provided, but that 97% then after the things moved and the map didn't seem to change that much really confused me. And maybe I should have done more research or something like that ahead of time, but it just dawned on me is when the C4 came up and that drastic percentage change. And I don't think that's healthy to put any school, obviously, in that level of percentage, and so understanding.
The 97.
Yeah, that wouldn't be okay with me from a strategic planning perspective. But I would like to see what portion that jump made, because the maps themselves, we're getting to the point where they're extremely different between the Jeffers Pond area, but not so much in the other areas, so that was a confusing thing.
Any other comments or questions?
I'll just piggyback on that slightly, and I think hopefully we should move on from the C2 discussion. But to me, the deal breakers with C2 are that you have a 97% occupied building at the end of 5 years, and you have the second most occupied building being Jeffers at 88 in 5 years, and 2 of our areas of interest that we have identified as potential growth spots both feed those 2 buildings if they get developed. And so if those start to happen, we're gonna be bursting at the seams and doing boundary changes in 3 or 4 years, which isn't what the objective was in my mind.
And can I ask a qualifying question to that? Because we're assuming the new developments that we already know about, but not the ones that we don't know about. For instance, the Beerman property, and we don't even know how that's gonna be zoned. I think to me, that was the biggest variable, of which it doesn't appear that anything but the C1 option actually took into account to a certain degree. So again, trying to do the process of elimination and lay the maps on top of each other, that's where the confusion came from.
Yeah, you're accurate with that, Mary. You know, we don't know what's gonna happen with, we just call them areas of interest, you know? But we know that they were something we wanted to pay attention to, because should that land be sold or developed relatively quickly, that would have impact, on whichever buildings in that boundaries.
And by the way, the zoning of that would be particular simply because of the traffic. So if they made it mixed use, which is maybe more likely given the area that it's in, that's gonna impact traffic. And that's something that needs to be considered both ways. But it's like a genie in the bottle, right? We don't know. So that was the only thing that I saw as the biggest variable, but again, trying to understand the percentages of the population and where those were coming from with that huge jump between, the options would be helpful, because everything else stayed relatively consistent, and fairly equal, although Jefferson in a few cases did look lower than the average. And they aren't gonna experience that much development in that area that we know of, right now, because most of that is already underway. I mean, we already have counts for that, and there's not a lot of ifs in that except for that real piece. And unless I'm wrong, unless I missed something.
No, but our, no.
Are there any other comments? We'll move on.
My comment to respond back to Mary's would be, basically, if we're getting into 97% capacity at a particular school, that's when the open enrollment comes into play. And then we can shift from there. That's why we use that leverage for open enrollment. That doesn't concern me.
Just a reminder though, that, all of the models that you see are just resident students. The models that we see do not have open enrolled students accounted for.
Just one additional comment from me.
Sure.
I can pore over this data, and I have spent hours and hours just poring over it, driving to different areas and looking at it. I'd be really curious to, I guess, collect some of the feedback from the design team on why specifically they, what were some of the benefits or some of the detractors of the different options that they put forward and why they are prioritized over other ones. Just to help my edification as we look at each one of these three different options.
I'm not sure how to respond to that.
Well, we did ask, Dennis last time he was here, I did ask him for the pros and cons, and he said they're all pretty much equal. But we don't know if they made that list, and I would concur, I would ask the same question again, is if they did have it, if we could look at, how they did their pro and con columns. I think it would help us understand what was in their head and the reasoning behind their decisions. So that would be beneficial to me also. I just got the distinct impression, and I think we need to go back and see what Dennis said. I thought Dennis said they didn't really have one because they thought they were always equal. So I wouldn't have any way of answering that based upon what Dennis said either.
I understand what you're saying. At some point, we're crossing a line of having a group spend all the time, do all their work, and then asking them to come forward and say why we couldn't do this, why we couldn't do that, and then changing it all. If I run that committee personally, I'd be saying, why did I bother to spend all this time doing this? And so I think we have to be a little bit cautious about that they did have good reason. And I agree with you, Dennis, for the most part, said that, you know, all of these are viable, but what's the best one for us? And we asked them to come forward with recommendations. So I just caution all of us that we, you know, pay attention to that. We do want our community involved, and we do want them to do committees and be helpful to us, and I don't wanna say, well, we don't want your recommendation anymore. So I just caution us about that. I understand what you're saying. I would have loved to have been at all those meetings, but that wasn't our call, that wasn't our direction, so. Stacy?
I'll just kind of reiterate, I think, just from the committee standpoint, I mean, I think you saw the balance, you know, there was representation from every group. So this is really bringing those voices forward. And I think we have to honor the fact that we did ask them, given, you know, I gave feedback to Dr. Stallo, you know, of my concerns that, hey, is there something else we can do? And so the fact that they came back with their option, I think addresses some of those concerns. And so, you know, I think we need to be clear in sticking with these three. I mean, that would be mine.
I would echo that in terms of we really, I think when we set out, we made a real effort to involve community members and parents so that they represented those voices at that decision-making level. They had layers of data and information that we don't have to wade through, that they used to make the recommendations that they did. And I do want to thank them and honor them. And I do think that we pushed. I mean, we listened very carefully at the last work session. We did lots of phone calls after that. We did, you know, lots of asking of questions. And we did go back to them already and say, okay, we are listening to the community. We're reading the letters that are coming into the board. So I do want to be cautious about that. I also would like to ask a clarifying question just to make sure I understand with the open enrollment comment. 97% with that C2 option is resident students, so there's only 3% room left for people who live in our district already. Open enrollment won't address that because we can't take our resident students, we won't take them and move them out. So I'm just making sure I understand that that capacity is not flexible based on open enrollment, but we can put them where there's other open spaces, but it won't bring that capacity down. Correct. Okay. And then I would just like to reiterate too that this is both a numbers game and planning game and an emotional game. And I just want the community to know that the board has taken the emotional part very seriously. The amount of hours we put into listening and thinking and strategizing. Please know that every letter is being read and talked about and shared. And I will come back to, even though it's personal and emotional and we will never have everybody happy, we went to 2 school board training sessions in the last 2 weeks in Minnesota, and there are schools changing boundaries because they're closing buildings, because the schools have to cut millions of dollars from their budget. So as difficult as this is, I also want to remind ourselves that we're doing it because we're in a really healthy district right now. So that doesn't necessarily take the pain away. It gives us a little bit of a context. We have these growing pains, but we're not cutting buildings and cutting choir and cutting counselors and that sort of thing. So this is all very emotional. I just want to know everybody, we've been listening.
Michael, you stole some of my thunder, but that's great. We all realize boundary changes are really difficult. There isn't any other way to look at it. It's hard. And we know that some are gonna be happy and some are not. And I'm sorry for those that are not, but keep in mind that, you know, we're a large growing district and we do have a lot of families that are moving. One whole school, as Dr. Stella referred to, is moving. Those kids won't be necessarily with any of their friends. They're gonna be moving into a whole different buildings. And that's a whole school. So we have to keep in mind the whole district. Each one of your children is very important to us, but we also have to look at the whole picture of what's best for all the kids as much as we can and what's best for the district moving forward. I think we're ready to allow public comment. However, I just want to make it known that Dr. Stallo, Jim Dello, and Jeff Holmberg will be leaving at 6:30 to meet with the Savage City Council to discuss Hamilton Ridge. So they're not leaving because they didn't like what you said. They just have to leave to another meeting. And that also after this meeting, we have or after the work session, we do have a school board meeting that's tentatively scheduled to start at 7. And then in the days to come, our next work session is May 20th, and we will allow for community input at that work session as well. And planned vote for June 10th at this point. So I guess with no other delays, we'll start with the public comment. If you can please limit your comments to 3 minutes or less. And if you feel that you're repeating the same thing and you don't want to come up, that's fine, just let me know. And we'll start with, you don't need to go up to this microphone, it's not on. So you can either stand by the podium if you want, stand to the side of it, whatever, but this little gadget in front here is recording, so we just wanna make sure that you can be heard. So you can just come up and stand anywhere around
Thanks
here,
for
wherever
saying
you're
that.
comfortable.
Still intimidating.
Not trying to intimidate.
I have handouts.
And this is Lisa?
Lisa,
Okay.
yes, and I have handouts, sorry, not enough for the whole class, but I'm gonna take one and pass them down. These are just maps. And just like when I bungee jumped in high school or college, I had to go first tonight, otherwise I would lose my nerve. So, my name is Lisa Youngling, and I am normally not one to speak up at these meetings. Terrified, but this is a very, very important subject, and I just wanted my point of view heard tonight. My husband and I have 3 daughters, 2 of whom currently are at Jeffers Pond. My family's been a Jeffers Pond family for 6 years. We live in Nob Hill, and our house is 1.5 miles from Jeffers. And you can see on the map, this one, can I grab that from you? This one right here. Did everyone get that one?
There's 2.
Oh, there's two, yep.
Okay, sorry.
So, yeah, if you wanna pass that one down. This shows how close we are, it's just down the hill, really. Over here, that's the mess. It shows where my house is. By the S, that was my daughter's phone, that was on this morning, so. The S is where I live, and then it shows the map to Jeffers. I chose to stay home with my kids after I had my, first child, which, now that my kids are all in school, gives me an opportunity to volunteer frequently. I'm there at Jeffers all the time. I've done Bravo, which is a music appreciation program. I do high frequency words, lending library, field trips, picture day, vision testing, sorting papers, hanging art projects, you name it, I've done it. Our proximity to the school is one of the reasons why I volunteer so much. We chose to live by our neighborhood school so that we could be involved. Some of the options being presented have our neighborhood going to Westwood instead of our neighborhood school, Jeffers. Westwood is over, and you can see that on the other map. It shows my house by the S, and then it shows the most direct route to Westwood, I hope that you all have that, is more than 4 miles away, which is, rounds to about 3 times as far from our house to Westwood as it is from Jeffers. And the other direction, by the way, if you go Highway 13, is even further. It's 6 miles from our house, over 6 miles. My oldest daughter went to Stage for 3 years. She's now at Twin Oaks, but she went to Stage for 3 years at Westwood, and she rode the bus, and she got home 25 minutes later than my other kids. So it wasn't a 25-minute bus ride, it was 25 minutes later than my other kids did. So my other kids would come home, have a snack, get their homework done, go play, and she still wouldn't be home. And my other 2 kids who currently are at Jeffers, they get home at 3:58 every day. I can time it and stand out, it's 3:58 every day. So that later bus time made it more difficult for after-school activities that start at 4:30 or something like that. So last week I was chatting with a teacher at Jeffers, and she said, well, when it comes down to it, we were talking about all the uncertainty and the anxiety everyone's feeling about this. She said, when it comes down to it, it's about the kids, which it is. And she said, some of the kids will be fine if they move, but some won't. And we already are having so many kids move from Grainwood and some from Five Hawks. Let's not make our Nob Hill kids move too. The options being presented tonight, the 3 main options were developed with, my understanding is incorrect Westwood figures. I think you touched on that tonight. Okay. Instead of regrouping, Sarah, do you want to start coming out because you're after me? Okay. Instead of reworking the boundary lines to prevent viable options, I feel like the numbers were just plugged in. And now C1 option that had my neighborhood, Nob Hill, in staying at Jeffers where we desperately want to stay, that option seems less favorable. I feel like this is not a fair process and it needs to be reworked. There's many people in the community, including our Nob Hill friends and Carriage Hills, that want to desperately stay at Jeffers. There's some Five Hawks families who are supposed to maybe move to Jeffers but want to stay at Five Hawks. We've got Westwood families who can see the Westwood building from their home being moved to Hamilton who want to stay at Westwood. I would ask that we try to relook at the boundaries so that more families can stay at their current location where they want to. But if you choose to move forward with the current options, please choose C1, so our Nob Hill kids can stay at our school. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sarah Widmer. I live in Nob Hill as well, with my husband Norm and 2 kids. I have Abigail, who's in 3rd grade right now, and I have Bennett, who's in pre-K, both at Jeffers, and we really love it there. One thing I'll just come out and say is, I'm not a public speaker, I'm an accountant. But it's really important for me to be able to advocate for my kids because they can't advocate for themselves. I don't envy your decision. I think it's very difficult. And the fact that it impacts so many families and so many kids, I wouldn't want to be in your shoes. I just hope that you take all of the information the community that clearly is interested is giving you into consideration. The input team, I appreciate their time. I don't have time to do things like that, but I make time to come to these meetings. So I've been planning my kids' education since 2 years before I even had my daughter, who's 8 now. We moved to Prior Lake for the schools. And some people said, I can't believe you were planning that far ahead. My answer is, I can't believe you didn't. But it's very important to me. The sense of community we have at Jeffers Pond, because we're a neighborhood school, reminds me a lot of when I was growing up. I had K through 12 in one building. So we had nothing but sense of community and community pride. We have that at Jeffers. Our neighbors who are at Carriage Hills are our family and our community. And just so to take and split our neighborhood in half with a potential C4 option doesn't make sense. I just really hope that we can have that strong sense of community. My kids will get to drive past the school that they've known every morning and every evening. I will drive 1 mile to Jeffers or 4 miles to Westwood. I don't think that's fair, and I think that that's going to be impactful to my kids because we need time for homework, we need time for free time in the evenings, and if I ever decide that my kids get to take the bus, because currently I do before and after care, they'll be on the bus much longer and potentially could miss out on after-school activities. I just think that, you know, my great uncle was my elementary school principal, and he showed me that people will never choose wrong if they put kids first. And so I really hope that, you know, our community that we're all very proud to be a part of will get to voice our concerns, and everyone will put the kids first. And when we do that, everyone wins. Unfortunately, my daughter, Abigail, who's in 3rd grade, fortunately or unfortunately, heard about this, and it's given her a strong sense of anxiety, wondering what's going to happen. She'll move on her 5th grade year and then have to move again for 6th grade for middle school. I just, you know, try to ease her worries, and her biggest fear is losing her friends. She really voiced that concern to me, and, you know, I try to console her, and she keeps saying, well, have they made a decision? Have they made a decision, Mom? And I'm like, no, there isn't a decision yet. Okay, and one question that she keeps asking me, and so I'll leave you with this,
Finish up.
is why are they doing this to me? So I'll leave it at that.
Hi, I'm Dina Tushin. I'm going to apologize because I have a cold, so I'll try and hang in there here. I will keep it very short and brief. I spoke at the last meeting as well. And I want to, first of all, thank you. You'll hear a lot of people on the west side of the community speaking tonight. If you look at our schools, there's less on the west side, and so that doesn't surprise me, right, as you look compared. And I had an appointment this morning in Prior Lake, and I was at that appointment, and the individual knew my address, and we were doing the small talk, right? So I'm gonna tell you a little story about what our conversation sounded like. And she said to me, she's like, oh, okay, what's the age of your kids? And I have a 4th grader and a 2nd grader. And she said, so you go to Jeffers then, right? And I said, yes, we do. And to me, that just immediately connected the community and that community school, because she knew where I lived, and I live in Nob Hill. And so she immediately just assumed, you're at Jeffers, right? You're right down the block. And so I ask that you really look at the communities and you really look at the number of displaced students. Because if we really look, and I understand, this is a difficult decision. Students are gonna get displaced no matter what, right? But I really look and think about if there's a way to reduce that amount, that would be great. So thank you. Hi, I'm Andrea Bernhardt. Spoke last time. I work over at Jeffers. This is actually my 4th school district I've worked at, and we chose Jeffers Pond and Prior Lake schools because I knew I've seen the state numbers, I was in data, I know all of that, and I chose Prior Lake schools. That's where I wanted my kids to go. People always said, oh, why don't you just go where you're working? Nope, I want Prior Lake after schools, and we chose Jeffers because of the nature-based programming. I have a degree in outdoor education, so I truly believe in what that school has. So I understand that you have to do this, I get it. There is overcrowding at Red Tail, Five Hawks. They see it, they feel it, they know they're gonna have to move. Jeffers Pond hasn't had any capacity issues. So as you can see, a lot of us are here from Jeffers because I think we were like, wait a minute, what? There's never been a capacity issue at Jeffers. Why are we having to move? So I think that's where a lot of the shock came in and why we're so well represented here. And I think the growth that you're seeing based on the maps, a lot of the growth I feel is deceiving because you see those blue bubbles and a lot of them are like one house, one house, one house. That's not a huge growth, but when you look at it in a big picture, you see all this blue dots. So I just question, is there really that much growth occurring in Jeffers Pond? I feel like the C4 plan is splitting our neighborhood into 2. I appreciate you guys going back. I know that's a lot to bring everybody back, but I feel like that's just splitting an entire neighborhood. The Carriage Hills neighborhood, it's being split in half with Nob Hill and Carriage Hills. But I guess I just wondered why C4 and not C2 and C3. So I just leave you at that. Thank you guys for listening. I appreciate it.
Melissa Wendell.
Hi, I'm Melissa Wendell, and we are part of the Martinson Island community. Currently, with the options that are being presented today, our kids are not being displaced, but we are in here of support of making sure that we displace as many students as possible. And with the rumors of the potential of C2, with which people want, we are a very small section of probably 20 students that would be displaced. With the busing, having to send a bus all the way up to grab a very small amount of students, we would just request that if C2 is brought back to the table, that area of the Raspberry Ridge and Martinson Island area is reconsidered, being put back at Jeffers, just because of the small amount of students and the impact that it would have for those kids. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Carla Duncan. We live right across the street from Melissa, so I just wanted to put a plug in for Martinson's Island, which is this little blip right there. And request that C2 not be put in the mix, or if it is, if you add Raspberry Ridge and Martinson's Island back into Jeffers Pond. Most of the plans keep us there, but a couple of them move us back out. And just to avoid bus traffic for a small group of people hauling us across the bridge through downtown, it would be a lot easier if we just stayed at Jeffers where we currently are. And just one more plug for C4, just to think about, is the nature preschool. I know is a huge draw at Jeffers. And I know you said you can move the preschool boundaries around, but I just want to put a plug in for them to keep it at Jeffers. As if you get near capacity and you want to pull it to another school, I don't think that's a good solution either, just for that program. Thank you.
I'm gonna stand behind this so you don't see my legs shake. Good evening, members of the board. My name is Tracy Naniga, and I live in the Nob Hill neighborhood.
We have lived in Prior Lake for 12 years and moved twice to stay within the Jeffers boundaries. Jeffers is our home. Both my husband and I volunteer weekly with SiteWorks, Junior Achievement, field trips, etc. Our Nob Hill neighborhood has banded together to have our voices heard. We spread the word to our fellow neighbors about these proposed changes, and we responded in full force to the community meeting. We have a petition with over 700 signatures to include both Carriage and Nob Hills at Jeffers. We sent emails to the board, we went knocking door to door, and we had representation at the last school board meeting, so our voices would be heard. We love our neighborhood and we love our school, and we want our kids to continue growing up at Jeffers. A common goal from all the input meetings was keeping neighborhood schools, similar to what you said already today. These now 3 options do not represent this objective. Nob Hill and Carriage Hills are one and the same. I'm standing here with support with 2 other Carriage Hills neighbors. Emily runs most mornings with a handful of Nob Hill neighbors. Oh, I lost my spot, sorry. Callie's daughter.
We're really close, it's
Yeah.
the same neighborhood.
Callie's daughter is one of my daughter's closest friends. We are not 2 neighborhoods, we are one. We even call our neighborhood the Hills. We share a bus. All of our kids' best friends are in this neighborhood. With this new C4 option, you are basically splitting one neighborhood in half. This isn't fair to our kids. I'm terrified to have that conversation with my youngest daughter on why your best friends that we bike to all the time get to stay at Jeffers, but we were selected to move schools. These little minds will not understand this, and I'm fearful for both my daughter's mental health if I have to have this conversation with them. Or when my kindergartner asks why she isn't able to do the things at Jeffers she watched her older sister do in 2nd and 3rd grade. This whole process has been flawed since the numbers used for Westwood from the beginning were incorrect. They did not include Sage. Now you look at all the options and they are much more favorable for Westwood's capacity. Had the numbers been correct from the beginning, we may not have ended up here with B1, C2, or C1, I'm sorry, B1, C1, or even C4. We most likely would have ended up with C2. After the last board study session, our neighborhood felt for the other neighborhoods because we were feeling the exact same way. Overall, we are one community, and this whole process has split our community in 2, or now with C4, even into 3 groups. No one wins in these scenarios. I urge you to go back to the drawing board and look at all options. We have plenty of time. This should not be a decision made quickly with how many children and families this will impact. Now with numbers for Westwood, C2 is the best option. It keeps Spring Lake at the school they currently attend, Five Hawks, and moves Northwoods to Jeffers, along with keeping both Carriage and Nob Hill students at Jeffers. You do not have any of these neighborhoods passing another school on their way to school or increasing traffic or bus time across the lake. It's the most logical option for all of us. And most importantly, it displaces the least amount of kids, which should be our and your ultimate goal. We owe the families and children in this community more and deserve the time to look at all options. Right now, B1, C1, and C4 are not the best for our neighborhood schools. Please put yourself in our shoes and revisit options to include our 75 Nob Hill kids at Jeffers. We are 0.6 miles away from our neighborhood school. Thank you for your time.
Thomas Lambert.
Good evening. My name is Thomas Lenhart. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I share that with you because I know firsthand the emotional impact that kids face related to school stressors. I've also done a lot of reading of the literature on school mobility and its impact on students. So this is not a new phenomenon. This has been well researched for over 25 years in academic and mental health journals. And with all due respect to the input team, maybe you're familiar with this, maybe you're not. But the findings have been replicated in very consistent study after study after study. So here are some of the undisputed facts at this point. Studies have shown that children who switch schools are more likely to demonstrate a wide array of negative behavioral and educational outcomes, including lower test scores in reading and math achievement, behavioral difficulties, grade repetition, and lower graduation rates. Students who change schools are more likely to suffer psychological, social, and academic consequences. School changes disrupt important social relationships with peers, teachers, and other adults in the school system. School changes have a negative influence on classroom participation. Importantly, school mobility does not only affect the kids who move, it also has a negative effect on the children who remain in one school. Studies have shown academic achievement is lower for children who remain in one school but experience the disruption of stable peer groups and classmates. The reason that is, according to the research, is that student turnover affects the teachers and the amount of time that they devote to the kids who remain in one school because they're focused on integrating the new students. I could go on, and this certainly is not an exhaustive list, but these are undisputed facts at this point. Last but not least, studies demonstrate that teachers are also negatively affected. Research shows higher levels of stress, demoralization, and tension among staff at the schools where there's a student turnover. The term chaos factor has been used to describe the disruption and difficulties in managing classrooms with student turnover. So raise your hand if these are the outcomes you want for our students. Nobody. Not surprising.
You need to finish up.
I will.
Your time is up.
So in short, the evidence demonstrating the harmful effect of kids changing schools is overwhelming. Thus, I have a hard time fathoming that in good conscience, anyone would cast a vote that unnecessarily displaces students from their current schools. Why disrupt kids and uproot them and affect our teachers when it's unnecessary? The displacement should be kept to an absolute minimum. Thank you.
Hi, that's okay. I'm Tracy Prasanna, and I'm also in the Nob Hill area. And this is actually my first time.
Tracy, did you sign up? I'm sorry.
Did I sign
Did
up?
you- did
No,
you-
was I supposed to?
Yeah, I need to take the people that signed up
Oh,
first.
I'm sorry.
And then
Oh,
if you want to
okay.
come up.
All right.
Sorry. Becky Schultz.
Oh, I'm sorry. I feel like I'm taking your spot.
So now I have to follow that. Hi, I'm Becky Schultz. I live in the Nob Hill neighborhood. I'd like to take this opportunity to share how I understand the options presented tonight were developed during the study session of the 22nd of April. If this were a question and answer session for the community tonight, I would ask how they came up with the additional option. And I strongly urge the board to peel back the onion and really ask the tough questions and validate and verify how they came up with this additional option. So last week, during the study session, I feel like the input from the input committee was anything but. The following is a direct quote: "We have an additional option and we're not taking additional input." As a board member, as a taxpayer, and as a mother, I feel like we deserve to understand better how that additional option came about. Why weren't the other options more heavily considered? Why this one over that one? And I don't feel like we got that answer more as directly as I would have liked tonight. So let's talk about open enrollment. It's a cause many people ran for office on, and I will break down some numbers for you that my Nob Hill friends and I foraged and scrounged for. And because we could not get good open enrollment numbers or in-district transfer numbers. We counted one by one, over 190 students at Jeffers Pond alone that are open enrolled or in-district transferred. So how big does this problem get? Just in kindergarten at Jeffers Pond, there's over 32% of the students that are open enrolled or in-district transferred. If you break down that number, 32%, that is 19 students. That's almost an entire class. With 75 Nob Hillers here, I propose that we put our students first, address open enrollment, and prioritize our resident families. And we can reevaluate open enrollment when the district changes and evolves. But we want to make sure that we accommodate the students that are already going to Jeffers Pond. We are 0.6 miles away. We pay taxes here, and we want to remain at Jeffers Pond. Now, while I was going to door this weekend, I stopped and talked to a dad who lived on Hummingbird Lane. That's directly squarely in the middle of Nob Hill. His daughter goes to Sage, and he has a son who hopefully is going to go to kindergarten in 2020. He said the bus times that were given in the meeting back in April of 30 minutes or less were just simply not true. He said he lives this every day. It's 40 to 60 minutes every day. As one parent said, her children get off the bus at 3:58 every day from Jeffers Pond. I know that's true too, because I live that every day.
Becky, you'll need to finish up.
I will. So we have an option in C2. I urge the board to go back to C2. We have the time, and we should take the time, and it's a win-win for almost everyone in this room. And it keeps our students at Jeffers Pond that are already going to Jeffers Pond, and you don't have neighborhoods passing over and through and around each other to get to a different school. Thank you.
Rachel Lynn?
Hi there, my name is Rachel Lind, and I too live in Nob Hill. I'm here in support of a solution that really displaces the least amount of kids. I'm here to support a solution that keeps neighborhoods close to their schools. I'm here in support of a solution that doesn't have kids traveling around the lake past their current school on busy roads all the way to Westwood. I'm here in support of a solution that keeps the 300 or so households in Nob Hill in the Jeffers Pond boundary. The hasty addition of C4 goes against the process, at least as it was explained to us. I've been told by several input committee members that it was not allowed to be discussed, that C4 was just decided upon. There are only going to be 2 options presented. Having this third option is much like adding another candidate to an election. You know, no doubt it's going to take away some of the votes from some of the best options, and that's my biggest concern. I think if everyone is truly listening to everyone who spoke at the last board meeting, C4 wouldn't be the option on the table today. It would be C2. And I say that because C2 would ensure that the Spring Lake Estates people wouldn't have to go all the way around the lake. That was their biggest concern. The people at Northwoods wanted to be displaced to Jeffers. And that leaves Carriage Hills and Nob Hills continuing to stay at Jeffers. I mean, that was the whole conversation that night. It displaces a community that wants to be displaced but keeps everyone else put. It's what everyone had talked about. C4, along with B1, it also includes neighborhoods that they made a conscious decision when they bought or built their house. They knew going into it that they weren't living next to a community school that their kids could walk to or bike to. As everyone said, I'll repeat it, we moved specifically into Nob Hills because we wanted that close community school. And again, the 0.6 miles from our neighborhood, it's much closer than other neighborhoods that have been added to some of these plans, and I think that that fact should not be ignored. Now to address open enrollment, I'm all for it. I know that the extra money that it provides. However, I do not think that open enrolled kids should get priority, especially after those of us that went door to door trying to support the referendum. We got it passed, now we're paying the higher taxes, and that's not okay. There are around 75 kids in Nob Hill right now. There's currently over double that at Jeffers that either open enroll or in-district transfer. I don't know if I necessarily like any of the options, but I suggest we take a look at C2, but include the part right here with Raspberry Ridge and the island there for sure. This option. These 2 options displace the fewest, or this option displaces the fewest amount of students, which should be the #1 priority, and it keeps residents happy across the city. So thank you for your time.
Noel?
I was going to say what I was gonna say and listening to Tom, I was gonna say, I grew up in Prior Lake and went to St. Michael's, and so glad I didn't have to experience any of that. And then I remembered when he talked about, sorry, I get emotional, and I'm not good at speaking and I cry, so. We moved here when I was 5, and I had to repeat kindergarten because I had such a anxious year. From that move. Back to my point, is that I feel like we shouldn't be afraid to bring schools to full capacity. According to that consulting firm, which I found out we are paying for and we voted in, that's around 104%. Not one option comes close to that number, even in 5 years. According to the consulting firm, in the duration of most boundary changes. I support Nob Hill and getting back into Jeffers Pond boundary, even if it means bringing 1 or more schools to 104%. I think it's what's best for our kids. You talk about the numbers in the district, or district students are what we looked at. Well, that's what we should be looking at, is the number of our kids, is what we should look at first. I'm one of the few, I'm also someone, just like everyone else here, that picked my neighborhood because I'm a working parent, my husband works and he travels, so half the time I'm a single parent running around trying to get my kids to and from everywhere. So we picked somewhere that is an easy drop off, easy on 169. Last summer, when I had to, for KidsCo, bring my kids over to Edgewood and the high school, I added another hour-and-a-half onto my full day commute. That's a long time. I didn't get as much accomplished. I just ask you to keep us intact. Don't trade our kids out because other schools are nearing capacity. Think about this stuff. Look at the C2 that we've talked about, and I agree adding in that small section of Lourdes and Raspberry Ridge because it's only about 25 kids. But that's all. Thank you. Sorry.
Danny McCarter.
Hi, I'm Danny McCarter. My wife and I moved here about a year ago. We chose the Nob Hill neighborhood for the same reason as everyone else, to be close to Jeffers for our 2 daughters. I think what we're looking at here is a bit of overanalysis. So, just to make one more rhetorical point, here's our neighborhood, and here's Westwood. And there's a small geographic feature between those. It's a big body of water right here. There's no good way to get from our neighborhood to this school, period. If the priority is neighborhood schools, there's only one school that works for our neighborhood, period. That's all there is to it. In fact, there's a Shakopee school that's closer to our neighborhood than Westwood is, and far more convenient. So, unless the district wants to invest in a water bus to cross the lake right here, that'd save us some time. The quality of my life and my girls' life will be drastically reduced by having to go to this school as opposed to our neighborhood school. Drastically reduced. We will lose days of time together.
Kyle Nanego.
Good evening, school board members. My name is Kyle Namiga, and I live in the Nob Hill neighborhood, and was also part of the input team. As part of the input committee, I remain motivated to achieving the best and most appropriate boundary options for every neighborhood in our community. However, I feel that after 40+ hours of working on these options, the input team was handicapped from getting the best options moved forward to the school board due to lack of transparent neighborhood numbers, including the SAGE numbers that rolled up to Westwood Elementary. Many of the options that were presented in the last study session and this evening were developed based on numbers that, again, were not represented correctly. This is a pure example of bad information in, bad results out. There are many people within the input team that want to continue to look at better options or amending or realigning the current options that may work better for an overall neighborhood and community standpoint. An example of this could be C2. This option keeps the majority of current children at their current schools while displacing as few kids as possible. The main highlights of this option are it reduces children's bus time, it reduces bus traffic across the lake, and it keeps traffic through downtown at a minimum. Our objective, our overall objective, is to displace as few resident children as possible. This option really speaks to that point. Now there is some refinement for this option as well to balance out the numbers, but certainly has the framework to set up for a viable option to replace any of the current options on the table currently. If you look at C4, the westernmost area, which is currently aligned to Five Hawks, is roughly 5 miles to Jeffers Pond from there. My neighborhood, Nob Hill, is less than 0.6 miles to that. If I would have to go to Westwood, that's gonna be almost 8 times longer of a drive, if you think about it that way, right? Almost 5 miles to Westwood, I live 0.6 miles to Jeffers right now. So you imagine the amount of time that it takes, right? Kids to school and back from school, right? Each day waving to their former school, right, as they pass it. Excuse me. This option additionally folds in the neighborhoods of Nob Hills, Carriage Hills, right? Keeps them at Jeffers, and folds in Meadows and Northwoods as well as Island View. C2 again, in its current state, isn't the best option, right? You guys kind of looked at it, right? There's some balancing that has to be done, but if you fold in what my neighbor, Melissa Wendell pointed out, if you fold in the Island as well as the Windsong and Raspberry Ridge neighborhood, and then if you look at the Five Hawks numbers, which you guys talked about earlier being 97%, if you look at the former original state of our boundaries, if you look at Mushtown Road, east of that, those kids could all go to Red Tail Ridge, which again has much more capacity right now, so it could be utilized much better. So right here, these kids right here that are gonna be displaced from Greenwood, these kids all could go to, they'd go to Red Tail Ridge. That would lower the numbers at Five Hawks, it would increase the numbers to better utilization at Red Tail Ridge, and then it would keep, again, majority of all the current people that live around the Nob Hill, Carriage Hills area, the people that have sent you emails and letters and phone calls, right? To keep those people at Jeffers Pond, which is ultimately what we're trying to do. So what I would request is that you tell the design team and input teams to roll back up their sleeves, look at more options that make better alignment for keeping neighborhoods within their neighborhood schools. Jeffers Pond was built for the Nob Hill, Carriage Hills, and Wilds neighborhoods. Our children do not only attend Jeffers Pond, but we as a collective neighborhood, again of Nob Hill, Carriage Hills, and the Wilds, we are Jeffers Pond. I encourage you to keep it that way. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Joe Zek. I actually live in Northwoods Meadows, so I might be the first non-Nob Hills resident. So I do want to make it clear that I don't wish a poor outcome on your group at all. I also want to put my support behind reevaluating C2. I think it's a great option for everyone. I think that, you know, a lot of people in my neighborhood, and most if not all, would just as soon stay at Five Hawks, but that's not an option we're being presented. So hopefully all of you understand that we're not against you. We're just fighting the same fight you are. We don't want to go to Westwood, not because we think poorly of Westwood, but I also had to do drop off there for kids company last summer. It was horrible. When you look at traffic on Highway 13, downtown Prior Lake, it's gonna eat an hour or more into our day. That affects homework, sleep, school activities. So I just want to put our support behind C2 as well. If I look at the options that you have up here that are available, I also want to point out a couple facts. You know, against C1, again, not against Nob Hills, but you know, C1, one comment was made that, you know, one input was keeping people on the west side of the district, on the west side of the lake. And if you look at C1, this is the only option that has the most west point of the district. And I'm not in here, I'm right here, but it has the westmost point going all the way to the east side of the school. And it seems like some of the Five Hawks area down here is still pretty close to Westwood, and they don't have a lake to
am Allison Gagne, and I'm not used to talking to people who are older than 7, so I'm a little nervous. I'm a parent of 2 boys, they're 5 and 7, and I live in Nob Hill. They go to Jeffers Pond, and when the change is supposed to happen, they'll be in 3rd and 1st grade. And I'm just speaking to the board in favor of C1, even if that's not really an option, or any new options that would allow my kids to stay at their current school. Like many others have stated, we bought our home just a couple of years ago specifically to go to Jeffers Pond. I have a background in education, and when we were on the house hunt, it literally came down to Pinewood Elementary, a school in far eastern Egan, and Jeffers Pond. And we chose Jeffers Pond because of its location to 169 in Bloomington, where our families live. So we made the decision. Knowing now that my kids won't even get to have, my youngest won't even have a couple years there, it feels like we made like a $400,000 mistake, or just some huge mistake. You all have families and children too, whether or not they're older now, out of school, maybe it doesn't seem like as big of a deal in elementary school. But really that's where they spend the most of their time. They spend 5 or 6 years there compared to the other schools where they don't spend as much time. Whether your kids go to Red Tail Ridge, Prior Lake High School, whether they went to St. Mike's or Benilde St. Margaret's, you can probably proudly say that you chose your home because you wanted your kids to go to whatever school you chose to put them in. Both of my kids are kind of shy. They're slow to warm up to new situations. My son last year in kindergarten struggled a bit. He struggled with the routine, the long day, making new friends. The bus ride was terrifying for him, even though it's only 8 minutes long. He went through a really rough time, and he was eventually connected with the social worker at Jeffers Pond, who he made a really good connection with. And it helps him to have that person at the school where he can go to share his feelings and thoughts if he's feeling overwhelmed. He also met a really good friend on the bus who happens to live in Carriage Hills. They ride the bus together. I don't know how I could explain to him if C4 develops as an option, why his best friend on the bus that he's so comfortable riding with gets to stay at Jeffers Pond while we would have to move him to a different school. It just seems really hard, and it makes me wonder how long it would take him to adjust at the new school. Would it take him a whole nother year? By that time he'd be in 4th grade. It just seems like a big mix-up for the elementary school that we'd be in. I was one of the #1 supporters for the referendum both times we tried to get it passed. My kids were little, and we were affected by it initially when Edgewood started running out of space for their ECFE programs, because we attended ECFE. And I remember talking to Principal Ritchie, and it was like, why don't we have any more space for us?
Allison,
Finish out, okay. Basically, I also wanted to bring to your attention, this was the feedback from the Prior Lake High School, the very, very first night you guys wanted our feedback. C4 is similar to some of the initial plans that we saw, and what I've highlighted in green is all Nob Hill feedback. It's feedback of us saying it's too long of a drive, we have to go around the lake, yada, yada, yada. All right. Well, thanks for your time.
James Krukow?
Thank you. I'm in support of whatever option keeps the least amount of kids displaced. I'm in support of the option that keeps the most amount of kids with their neighborhood school. And out of the 3 of these, C1 has been answered. D1 displaces the most. C4, I believe, is only there to cannibalize the other 2 options. That being said, if you look at C2, C2 is better than all 3. C2 keeps the most amount of families from being displaced. C2 keeps the most amount of kids going to their neighborhood school. C2 keeps the 3 neighborhoods that are most represented here today. It keeps them all where they need to be. It keeps Carriage Hills and Nob Hill in Jeffers Pond, It keeps Northwood Meadows, who's been jockeying to be at Jeffers Pond, it brings them into the mix too. The problem with C2 is the 97% at the end with 5 Hawks. So we got an idea, and ideas matter, right? So we tell the design team to go back and redraw one more line, and it's to put this line right here back to where it is currently, which is the 5 Hawks eastern boundary. If we leave that boundary, Red Tail Ridge at 72% has the capacity to grab and absorb that. 5 Hawks goes down to maybe an 85% comfortable number. Red Tail Ridge goes to maybe 80%, and that's a comfortable number, and none of these people need to show up in 2 weeks.
Kara? Kara Kuna. Am I saying your last name right?
Chuka. Looks like Kuka, it's Chuka. It's fancy. My name is Kara Chuka, and I live in the Nob Hill neighborhood. I have 3 kids who attend Jeffers Pond. My daughter is in 2nd grade, and my twin boys are in kindergarten. From the very first meeting at the high school on March 18th, you have seen a huge presence from our Nob Hill neighborhood. We have worked together and have put in countless hours during research, we've presented facts, and have offered logical solutions that can accommodate all our community neighborhoods. Throughout this process, neighborhoods have been blindsided by new options that have been presented. They are options that have pitted us against each other. At the original meeting, the Carriage Hills neighborhood was blindsided when they were not included in either option A1 or B1. The Nob Hill neighbors invited Carriage Hills to come together, and we presented a logical and fact-based plan, and due to our research and diligence, that is when C1 was created. We were thrilled that it appeared our voices were heard. But that presented a problem for our neighbors in the Northwood Spring Lake area. They too were blindsided by this new option. So after the meeting, a few of us spoke to some of the members on the school board to point out for some reason the Trillium Cove neighborhood, which is a neighborhood that is under development that also has a natural boundary, was included in the Jeffers Pond boundaries in the newly presented C1 plan. It appeared to be a very easy solution. Take Trillium Cove out and add the Northwood Spring Lake neighborhood to C1. It was a win-win solution all around for all of our neighborhoods. Naively, we were feeling extremely optimistic when we heard an unscheduled meeting with the design and input team was called. Again, we felt like our voices had been heard. I can't tell you how devastated our Nob Hill neighborhood was to hear that C4 plan was moving forward as an option. A plan that would include Northwood, Spring Lake, and Carriage Hills, but would exclude Nob Hill out of the Jeffers Pond boundaries. Now you are breaking up an actual adjoining neighborhood. We, the neighbors in Nob Hill, Carriage Hills, consider ourselves as one. I can't wrap my head around any of this, that our Nob Hill neighborhood, who has fought not only for our adjoining Carriage Hills neighborhood, but our other friends in Northwood, Spring Lake, would not be considered after all of this. We have worked countless hours, walked door to door. We have spent time away from our kids and have explained to them that this is because we are their little voices and we are their advocates. Emotions aside, here are the facts of what should be top priority: displacement of resident students. I stress resident students because I can't help but think there is an underlying agenda where open enrollment students are getting more consideration than our own resident students. That is completely unacceptable. We now find out Westwood numbers have been inaccurate all along. How is it possible to make this huge important decision when all the numbers you have been basing your information on are incorrect? I came to this meeting completely disheartened. I hope to leave this meeting with a glimpse of hope. We have the time to go back to the drawing board and we can make this work for our entire community. Please consider our 75 Nob Hill kids at Jeffers Pond. We are 0.6 miles away, walking, biking distance from our neighborhood school. We elected you with the confidence that you will listen to your community. I know and I pray that you will take this time to get it right.
Stacy McGowan?
Hello. I am a resident of Nob Hill, and I am still in disbelief that I'm here fighting for my child and the rest of the children in my neighborhood. When I first heard the boundary changes that would occur, I could never imagine that Nob Hill would be affected. I am so thankful for all my neighbors that have put countless hours into making sure our voices are heard and our children stay where they belong. We are only 0.6 miles from Jeffers Pond. My thought was that the ultimate goal would be to do what is best for the current residents of the community, which means to displace the least amount of kids as possible. Nob Hill and Carriage Hills are tightly knit, and we are thankful that that option allowed Carriage Hills to stay within the boundaries. However, we feel separating the two and not including Nob Hill in the decision as well will have devastating effects for our neighborhood and our kids. We are proud of our community, neighborhoods, and schools. When I moved here from Maine, we picked that area we're living in specifically to attend Jeffers Pond. My family and I have been part of the school, Jeffers Pond, for 9 years, and I, along with several of my Nob Hill neighbors, have been heavily involved in volunteering and building relationships with the students and staff there. I know it comes down to numbers and statistics. The option C2 satisfies these as well as keeps as many kids as possible attending the school they have so much invested in. This shouldn't be a quick fix. We have time to get it right. While thinking of these numbers and statistics, think of the kids and the families too. Thank you.
That's the end of the names that are on the list. Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to talk to the board?
No,
sorry.
That's okay. I've never been to one of these before, it's my first time, I barely got here. I'm Tracy Persana, again, I'm in the Nob Hill neighborhood. Okay, I don't like talking, but I am pretty much, every story that you've heard tonight, that is me. My oldest, who is currently at Hidden Oaks, Jeffers Pond was his third school. We moved a lot. And when he was in third grade, we moved into Prior Lake because a friend convinced us, wherever she went, to look at Prior Lake, because Prior Lake was not an option at that time. And she said, you really need to look at Prior Lake. We got into we moved into the Jeffers Pond boundaries. We had rented a townhouse, and we had said, we've always said, wherever our oldest was in third grade, that is where we wanted to be. We didn't want to switch schools anymore, we wanted to be done. So that spring, going into his fourth grade year, we purposely looked only in Jeffers Pond to buy a house. And when you have, the price range and you want certain bedrooms on the same floor, it's kind of hard to find a house. And so when you find a house in Jeffers Pond, that's what you do. My daughter is currently at Sage. We know how it works when it comes to busing. She does not get home until pretty much 4:20. It's a very long ride, and we have an incoming kindergartner who will attend Jeffers this fall, hopefully for longer than a year. I don't want him going on a long bus ride. It's just, I want him to be able to know the teachers that his brother and sister have known for 4 or 5 years. And I can speak to how hard it is to switch schools. When he was my oldest was first grade, it was a really hard time. He had a really rough time having to switch schools, and he did it in the middle of the school year. I can't think of what else I wanted to say, but I'm just asking that you please, and I also have a traveling husband, so I know how it works with having to do everything. Just please keep Nob Hill and Jeffers Pond, because it absolutely makes no sense. And I have nothing against Westwood, because I love the SAGE program, but if my kid doesn't go to SAGE, I don't want him at Westwood. I want him in Jeffers Pond. That's the only reason why my daughter is at Westwood, is because of SAGE. Otherwise, she would still be at Jeffers Pond. And so I just ask that you please, please keep Nob Hill and Jeffers Pond, because it makes no sense.
Hi, Lisa Myers. You all got an email from me. I am new to the district. My kid was only 2, so I'm coming from slightly looking ahead, we had looked at several different houses in other parts of the cities that you could see the school and your kiddo would be bused 25 minutes away, and we said no. We walked away. We found out about the Nob Hill area. It hit all of our criteria. We could see the school. We were going there. We're like, great. We asked around. We actually talked to a bunch of our neighbors before we even moved in. We're like, do you like the school? What do you think about it? They all love it, which basically sold us on it. We knew it was a tight-knit community, and that's what we wanted for our kiddo. So even though she's not going there yet, that is where we plan to go. We bought our house last year. We have everything all set to go. We want to walk her to school if we can. When we can't, because I work downtown Minneapolis, I have to be at work at 7. My husband works in Plymouth, he has to be at work at 8. We might have to do before and after care if we can't swing our schedules. Driving completely around the lake, we're doing a long drive already. We can't do any longer. It's killer. So if you could please keep our neighborhood where it currently is, that would be appreciated.
Hi, I'm Penny Peterson, and I'm just going to look down and read because I'm super nervous. Thank you again for hearing us out. I live in the Carriage Hills, and while I was blindsided at the initial meeting, was happy to see and hear that our voices were being heard. And Carriage Hills is now included in 2 out of the 3 proposed plans. However, I am here to speak as the other half of our neighborhood is now excluded in 2 of the plans, which is not okay to me. We are one neighborhood, and I highly encourage the board to keep us together at Jeffers. I do not understand why you would move one group out to move another group in. I've looked at all the facts included and just do not understand. I said it last time, and I strongly encourage the board to keep in mind what is being said, and that while we're a growing community, we have a small town feel. In order to keep that, neighborhoods and neighborhood schools need to be considered. As someone pointed out how close they are, 1 point some miles versus 4 and 6. And though that may not seem like a lot, it is. It takes away family time, which should be a priority in our busy lives. I also want to remind the board who has shown up at these meetings, who has shown heart, looked up the facts, did their community duty to be passionate for their town. Mostly Nob Hill residents, a few Northwood families, and some others who are equally as passionate. I ask you to please look at C2 as the option which makes these communities and neighborhoods who have been the most vocal happy. If you will not look at that, I ask you to highly consider C1 that keeps resident and current families at Jeffers Pond. And then I know that this might strike a chord for some because I know some families that are affected, but I also heard tonight about like the pre-K, and I guess my opinion is just that we need to look at K-5 option, and while I would love to keep the preschools family there, do not feel that we should be moved out in order to keep the preschool families in their separate entities.
Hi, my name is Ross Greenhagen. My wife and I purchased a home in the Nob Hill neighborhood about 1.5 years ago. I know this is a difficult decision. I understand the rationale of the input design team only wanting to present originally 2 options and now a 3rd option. Obviously, we don't want to have 6 up here to choose from. Just makes the decision even more difficult. I think there was a mistake made in the original recommendations. I don't think B1 was ever a viable option. The idea that you're going to take kids that essentially live across the street or across Eagle Creek Parkway from Jeffers Pond and route them to Westwood, the idea that you couldn't foresee that there was going to be significant pushback to that plan just does not make sense to me. Like, anyone can look at this and say, you're going to take these 2 whole neighborhoods out of this school and put them over here and not have a room full of people saying, what are we doing here? Like, I think I'm all for transparency, wanting to consider all the options, but I feel like this needs to come down, that one needs to go up, and then we can have a real conversation.
Hi, my name is Ben Furseth. My wife and I moved to Prior Lake just like a lot of you guys did because the school systems, the community, this small town feel that Prior Lake actually has, right? All the small communities around, the neighborhood schools, everything else that goes along with that. As I listen to everybody else talk, we're kind of all, it seems like everybody feels the same way. Everybody's looking for the small town neighborhood schools that you can go to on a regular basis. I heard even the board talk about keeping the schools in a neighborhood area, keeping the west side of the lakes on the west side of the lake so that we don't have to have those long route times, those long commute times. I think that's kind of what I'm hearing from everybody else tonight. I remember we're talking about the entire town and not just certain areas of the town as well. So we gotta look at that as well. When we look at that and talk about the board and the way what you guys said regarding, sorry, I'm looking at my notes as well. Keeping the neighborhood schools, I think honestly C1 didn't accomplish that. Having people from all over the west side, all the way to almost all the way to the east side have to all go to one single school together, crossing multiple schools in order to get there. I think that eliminates that small town feel. You're actually crossing not one school, but two schools. On the other hand, looking at Prior Lake as it is and understanding the majority of people here that we've been hearing, taking B1 into account, taking people that are less than a mile away from one school and having them go all the way across the lakes to the other side of the school, to the other side of the city, in order to be able to go to another school across the way doesn't work either. I'm actually in Northwood, so I'm one of the minorities as far as the neighborhoods go here. And as I hear people talk about C2 as an option, I started to look at C2 on my maps, and it actually makes sense. You know, it allows the neighborhood schools to remain as neighborhood schools. It makes the groups that have been outspoken and talking the most happy in regards to the area schools that they get to go to. It keeps the schools on the west side, the people and communities on the west side of the lakes, in schools on the west side of the lakes, allowing us to not have to cross between the lakes, making that 21 lake crossing really, really difficult. We hear that we've heard it over and over again about that. My daughter right now is in district transfer to Jeffers. My wife is there. My wife's probably seen many of you guys who volunteer there on a regular basis. She's there 1 to 2, 3 times a week on a regular basis. I'm part of the dog program that goes and eats lunch with my daughter on the nights that we can. Goes helps and makes bird houses with the kitchen and that kind of thing, doing outdoor kitchen work that we did. And I want to be part of that still. I want to continue to be part of that, but it makes it a lot harder if I have to cross all the way through the lakes in order to get up to the other side of Prior Lake in order to be able to do that. Limited time, we want to spend as much time with the family as we can, just like everybody else here does. I think the options would be to take down C1, no offense to everybody that is interested in C1, and I would even possibly recommend taking down B1, even though it's in this was what I was actually talking about last time. But looking at C2 actually gives us the best options to be able to do all of that. So I think my vote would be for C2, even though it's not up on the board here. I'd like to reconsider. I'd like the board to actually reconsider and actually put C2 up on the wall as an option.
Hi, I'm Casey Filzen. I had no intention of speaking today. I kept hearing everyone talk about basically C2 as an option, and I'm not going to make any friends here, I know that. But even if you take C2 into the option as an option, you're then going to get Raspberry Ridge in here, doing the exact same thing all of these people are doing. You need to look at what is best for the school district in the long term, not just this short 5 years that my kids are currently in this school. Yes, my kid currently goes to Jeffers Pond, but you know, and I am in Raspberry Ridge as well. So, I mean, I guess that's the point I want to make. We need to look at what's best for the long-term schools. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Ida Lillycraft. I've spoken with you many times before, and I'm here in support of my Knob Hill neighborhood. I have kids in 4th grade and 6th grade, so this doesn't really personally affect my kids, but it obviously affects my neighborhood. I have a lot of the same things to say that other people say, but I'll just hit on a couple of other unique points to me. So one is I have a lot of appreciation and respect for the fact that you've engaged the community. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for listening and offering up study sessions. I also really respect the work that the committee did to look at lots of options. It's unfortunate, it sounds like a lot of the information maybe wasn't completely available to them, but I do appreciate and respect that if you are gonna make a decision, you kind of have to do that at some point. I also have a lot of empathy for the Five Hawks families that kind of have to move no matter what. One thought that I have about that is, from my perspective, it doesn't make sense to move them into Jeffers Pond and then move families that are in Jeffers Pond someplace else. You're displacing twice. I was really disheartened to hear tonight from Dr. Stala that it was not a goal or a requirement to factor in what are the displacement numbers for families. That just seems like such a key thing. Everyone here, I think, would agree with that. Built my house in the Nob Hill neighborhood actually 19 years ago, and so it wasn't a Nob Hill at the time. And I was told by my realtor then that the farm any day now is going to be built out. Any day now, it's still not built out. And so it saddens me that we are taking kids that are in schools and moving them for these potential areas that might have growth. It might take another 20 years. So please factor in, who are you displacing? Where are you putting them? The last point I'll make is about bus timing. I had 2 kids, one through Sage and one at Loyola Del Lago. It is a 45-minute bus drive, morning and night. And my kids are not the first ones on that bus or the last ones off at night. From my house, there is a bus stop and it takes 45 minutes each way. So what we heard at the last board meeting of it'll be about 20 minutes is not a fact, not a truth. So thank you for listening.
Afternoon. My name is Anu Drolia. I actually am part of Red Tail, but I'm also part of the input design team. And looking at some of the numbers that just came up with the Westwood or the Sage that we had missed, I think I was looking back at our April 10 numbers, and we had taken apart or taken off the table C2 and some of the options because the numbers were just through the charts, through the roof in terms of capacity. And I think as I look at the new numbers, some of these numbers have changed. So I think it makes sense for us to, as an input committee, to kind of look at all the options again and bring forth to you maybe the 2 or 3 options that resonate and resolve the impacts. Thank you.
Was there anyone else that wanted to speak this evening? Okay, as I said, and you all know, it's a tough decision. We've heard you, we're listening, we're trying to come up with the best option. We do want to respect the committee. And I guess just stay tuned and we'll be meeting again at our work session on May 20th, I believe it is. And you'll have a chance to speak then again. Thank you.